I smoothed the silk blouse over my shoulders, feeling the subtle weight of its fabric settle against my skin. The city lights outside my apartment stretched endlessly, golden and restless, and for a moment I let myself breathe in the quiet hum of my own space. My phone buzzed again on the marble countertop, and I resisted the urge to glance at it immediately. One more ping, one more message, and I could feel the tension knotting tighter in my chest. It was a dinner invitation from my mom. Not just any dinner. This was the kind of evening where words hung like knives in the air, where I'd been called lazy, a failure, never good enough. Memories of that sting, sharp and familiar, crept up the back of my neck. Yet here I was, late 20s, thriving career, a life I had painstakingly built, and yet still carrying the quiet ache of her judgment. I could hear the soft click of my heels as I paced, the faint scent of vanilla from the candle flickering nearby. It was all so calm, almost ordinary, but underneath, the storm churned. I knew I could face her tonight. I had to. There was a truth she'd never guessed, a secret tucked away in spreadsheets and bank statements, a hidden victory. And for the first time, I felt the thrill of knowing that the moment I spoke, everything could change. Because the woman standing here, ready for dinner, wasn't the failure she expected. She was the one who had quietly saved the home she'd criticized, the one who had paid $61,000 to keep everything afloat. And tonight she would know. I remember the night like it was yesterday. I was 19, sitting at the edge of our worn dining table, the air thick with the smell of roasted chicken and disappointment. My mom's eyes were sharp, her words cutting deeper than any blade. "You've never done anything for this family, Emily," she said, her voice low but biting. "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing sitting around daydreaming." My hands were trembling, fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that the wood left faint marks on my skin. My throat felt tight, like I was swallowing a fist, and I wanted to disappear into the faded wallpaper behind her. I wanted to explain, to show her I was trying, but every word I opened my mouth to speak seemed to vanish before it could leave me. The lump in my throat grew heavier with every accusation, every dismissive glance. I was small then, fragile in her eyes, my ambitions written off as fantasies. I felt unseen, unvalued, and unbearably alone. It was my grandmother who had noticed the tremor in my hands, the quiet defeat in my posture. Later that evening, she pressed a small, worn leather notebook into my palm, her fingers warm and steady. "This is for you, Emily," she whispered. "Write your ideas, your plans, your dreams. Don't let anyone tell you they're not worth it. One day, you'll look back and see how far you've come, and no one will be able to take it away." That notebook became my lifeline. Each page I filled was a step away from the shadow of judgment, a step toward proving, first to myself, that I was capable. I spent nights hunched over its pages, scribbling budgets, career goals, small victories I could measure, ways to quietly save for independence. The final straw came when my mom criticized me for not helping around the house while I was saving for college and paying small bills quietly to help out. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer wait for approval. I would carve my own path, carry my own weight, and maybe, just maybe, I could show her, without begging, that I was worth more than her words. And with that resolve, the first page of my life outside her judgment was written, the first seeds. After that night with my grandmother's notebook clutched in my hands, I started building a life I couldn't yet show anyone. My first real job was at a small marketing firm in Chicago, a place where ambition was currency, but youth was often dismissed. I was hungry to prove myself, not to them, but to the girl in that notebook who had dared to dream. I found a mentor in Claire, a seasoned executive with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, who somehow saw potential where others only saw inexperience. "Emily," she said during my first week, "stop trying to fit into the mold they've built for you. Create your own mold, and then crush it." Her words became my mantra. The early days were brutal. I remember the nights I stayed at my tiny apartment until 2 a.m., typing proposals, balancing budgets, learning the subtle art of negotiation. My hands were raw from typing, my eyes bloodshot, yet every small win, landing a client, Finishing a profitable campaign, receiving a compliment from Claire, felt monumental. Each victory was quietly thrilling, a proof point that I could survive, even thrive, without approval. I started taking freelance gigs on the side, saving every extra dollar. The process was painstaking. I tracked every expense, calculated every interest payment, and slowly, carefully, I've began transferring money to cover overdue bills at home without my parents ever knowing. $50 here, $100 there, it added up. By the time I was 24, I'd quietly contributed tens of thousands toward keeping the house afloat, a lifeline no one recognized. Social media became my camouflage. I posted carefully curated snapshots, friends, brunches, a few travel photos, but never the truth of my achievements. I didn't want their praise, I didn't need it. I only wanted to keep building, silently, until I could walk into a room and let my work speak louder than words ever could. And there were doubts. Oh, so many doubts. Nights when I wondered if I was stretching too thin, if I'd sacrificed too much, if my sacrifices were ever worth it. But each time, I opened the leather notebook and read the advice my grandmother had given me years ago. Each scribble reminded me why I'd started. Independence, resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was doing the right thing, even if no one else noticed. By 27, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had financial independence, a career I loved, and the satisfaction of knowing that, while they saw me as lazy or a failure, I had been quietly keeping the home they criticized afloat. And all of it, every late night and every calculated risk, remained a secret. My power was my own, unacknowledged but real. The woman who had once sat trembling at the dining table had grown into someone no one could underestimate. Not yet anyway. And soon, the moment would come when she would know. Dinner had been arranged at my parents' house, a familiar, heavy-feeling place, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. As I stepped through the doorway, the past wrapped around me like a second skin. My mom's eyes immediately flicked to me, narrowing, scanning for the girl she'd once dismissed. My dad, leaning casually against the kitchen counter, gave me a faint smile, but there was curiosity there, too. They didn't know what they were walking into. I walked past the familiar furniture, past the chipped china in the cabinet, past the lingering tension, and into the dining room. I paused, letting my gaze drift over the table, the chairs, the light catching on the crystal chandelier above. Everything was quiet, expectant, as if the room itself waited for me to speak. "I'm glad you invited me," I said softly, sliding into a chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The silk of my blouse shimmered subtly in the warm light. My mother's expression tightened, like she already sensed something was different, something she hadn't anticipated. They started in with a small talk, weather, work, mutual acquaintances, but I let it wash over me, nodding, letting the sound of my own calmness fill the room. Then I paused, finally leaning forward. "Mom, Dad, I think it's time I tell you something." I watched their faces as the tension grew. Mom's eyes darted between me and the table, and Dad's eyebrows lifted in mild surprise. "All those months," I said, my voice steady, "when you said I wasn't contributing, that I wasn't doing anything meaningful, you were wrong." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of my next words hang. "I've been saving quietly. I've invested, worked extra, paid bills you didn't even know existed. In fact, I contributed $61,000 to keep this house afloat." For a moment, nothing happened. The clock ticked loudly. The chandelier seemed to shine brighter, illuminating the disbelief on their faces. My mother's mouth opened, then closed, as if she were trying to swallow her shock. My father's hand gripped the edge of the table. You what?" Mom whispered finally, her voice a mixture of confusion and shame. "I've been the one keeping us on track," I said, letting the words sink in. "Every overdue bill, every late mortgage payment, every struggle you didn't see. I handled it, quietly. So when you called me a failure at dinner that night, I was already making sure everything would be fine." The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I could see the guilt beginning to settle on their faces, The sudden understanding that they had underestimated me, dismissed me, and yet had benefited from my hard work all along. I leaned back slightly, letting them take it all in. The woman before them, composed, strong, and accomplished. Not a failure, not a burden. Just someone who had quietly carried the weight they refused to acknowledge. And for the first time in years, the balance had shifted. The room was quiet, but now the silence carried a different weight. It wasn't tense with expectation or judgment. It was tense with realization. They finally saw me. Not the daughter they had criticized, not the failure they had dismissed, but the woman who had quietly carried more responsibility than they could have imagined. And with that realization came a shift. I held the upper hand. I took a deep breath, letting my gaze settle on each of them in turn. "I've helped keep the house," I said softly, "but this isn't just about money. It's about how we move forward. I can continue to support, but there are conditions. Things that need to change if this family is going to thrive together." Mom's eyes widened, and I could see the defensive walls forming, but I pressed on. "Mom, you need to recognize your words have power. Criticism is fine, but constant belittling isn't. You need to support rather than tear down. And Dad, you need to step up, not just financially, but emotionally. You've been present, yes, but absent when it mattered. That stops now." I paused, letting the words sink in, then continued. "We all have dreams. I want each of us to pursue them, without judgment, without guilt, without old patterns dragging us back. Toxic habits, resentment, denial, they have to go. We start being accountable, not just to each other, but to ourselves. That is non-negotiable." Their faces shifted between guilt, shame, and something softer, understanding. I could see my mother absorbing the truth that she had been harsh, my father realizing that he hadn't noticed the quiet labor I had undertaken. I spoke with warmth, but firmness. Compassion, yes, but no bending. I would not sacrifice my growth to soothe old wounds that had never been acknowledged. "And for me," I added, softening my tone just a fraction, "I want respect. I want recognition of effort. I don't need constant praise, but I will not be dismissed, minimized, or treated as if my contributions don't matter. That includes the money, the time, the energy I've invested in this family quietly for years." The shift was palpable. The energy in the room had changed. I wasn't just the daughter. They were beginning to understand I was a force, a person who could hold firm boundaries while still offering help and love. The power wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a structure where we could all grow, heal, and finally operate as a family that recognized each member's worth. I leaned back in my chair, letting the authority settle naturally into the space. "We do this together, but on these terms. I'll help, but only if we all commit. Otherwise, I step back." For the first time in years, I felt the full measure of my independence, not just financially, but emotionally and morally. I wasn't their failure. I was their equal, their anchor, and the person who had quietly rewritten the rules.